Will Carroll, welcome to the Bookshelf Conversations.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ron. I'm really honored that you had me on, and I'm excited with the idea that people are, actually reading my book.
Well, I mean, that's what every author hopes. So you've come up with some really interesting things that are a bit out of the mainstream, shall we say? It's not a biography. It's not a history. It's this one in particular is the science of baseball, the math, technology, and data behind the great American pastime. And speaking personally, when I see the word science in a title,
Yeah.
it's like, but I found it very interesting, very educational. It has one of the best explanations I've ever seen as far as explaining the different type of pitches that you always hear the announcers talking about. But there's a split this, or there's a slider. That
Mhm.
what actually does that mean? What does it entail for
Yeah.
the pitcher to throw it? How did you get involved, or how did you come by your interest in this kind of behind the scenes aspect of the game?
That's a great question, Ron. I was asked to write this book by the publisher. They've been doing a series of these science of books. They did a lot of them with movies. There's like Science of Star Wars, Science of Harry Potter, and those are really entertaining books that I think would grab an audience that wouldn't normally read a book that starts science of. If you told me, wow, this isn't true. I was about to say, if you told me a book that was physics of baseball, I probably wouldn't read it. But Robert Adair certainly did a great job with that. Science of Hitting by Ted Williams. So certainly, I don't want to put myself in that kind of company, but it's really a way for me to talk about baseball, things that people see and know. And as you said, here you hear an announcer talk about a sinker and then it doesn't sink. There was a pitch the other night. Somebody had 22 inches of run, and it was like, oh my god, 22 inches. That's like holding up a fish or something. It's kind of nuts. But what are they actually talking about? So when I was asked to write this, the idea I got was that I wish I remembered the book, but I can remember being like 12 or 13 and having to do a book report on something and picking out some book out of the library about baseball because it's baseball, not something serious. So my hope was that some 12 or 13-year-old, some 17 or 18-year-old, or really anybody with an interest would pick it up from their library and say, you know what, I learned something. Whether how the baseball is constructed and how important that is, or how different bats are, or as you said, just what the heck a sinker is, because it doesn't actually sink. Yeah, that to me was interesting. And looking a little bit behind the scenes and getting the insight from all the people that shared information with me during the process, that was, I learned so much. So I'm hoping people take away a little something as well.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the audience for a book like this. Are you going for people who are already baseball fans who might be interested in the science of it? Or are you looking for people who might not be baseball fans, but they see science, data, technology, and say, let me take a look at this?
A little bit of both. I think it's accessible to both audiences. If you like baseball, if you know baseball, then you've probably been following the two baseball crisis that we've had for the last couple of years, or the unjuiced baseball that we had for the start of this season. And Dr. Meredith Wills, who's been kind of leading the charge on this, really explained things to me and broke down how that is. So I think it's a situation where if you know and follow baseball, you're still going to learn something. And it's not going to be like, oh, I've seen this before. Oh, I knew that. There's going to be some of that because there are some really smart baseball fans out there. On the other hand, I didn't want to get so bogged down. This isn't like a how-to. This certainly isn't a textbook level. This is, I don't know, whatever is under 101 level. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be a baseball fan. I think on the other side, if you're wanting to get into the science of it and understand some of the principles behind anything from sports medicine to sports science to physics, there's a little bit in here that'll guide you and maybe be that gateway drug to something more serious.
I'm just going to quickly rattle off some of the chapter titles. The ball, the bat, hitting, pitching, the field, as opposed to fielding, base running,
Yeah.
training and development, scouts, umps in the old school, the mind and body, injuries, the cheats, analytics, and the future. Uh, like any parent says, all my kids are my favorite. Was there one topic in this book that really got to you, as opposed to one that you say, I don't really like it, but I have to include it?
No, I had a lot of freedom in this, so I didn't have to write about things. I mean, the hardest one I had to write about was that old school chapter where I talk about the umps and scouting a little bit. It it took that was the last chapter that really came together. There was some where it was like, you know, I knew that I wanted to start with the very basics, the ball and the bat. And you mentioned the field. We don't think about what goes in. We see a grounds crew out there and they've got a rake and a mower. There is so much that goes into it. And Joey Stevenson, who takes care of the field here in Indianapolis, Victory Field, which is one of the most beautiful parks, um, the work and the knowledge that goes into it. You don't think of a grounds crew as being scientists, but they really are. I mean, they go so deep, and I had no idea about most of it. I mean, I knew it was more serious. It's not like the guys mowing lawns who aren't exactly scientists. It's that one I learned so much. But if there was any chapter that was my favorite, it was the mind and body, because I think that's the area where so few people really have an insight into both what's happening in baseball now, what's happening in sports in general. And it just drew into my personal interests. A lot of the work I've been doing over the last 3-4 years has been focused on recovery. And I think we all understand working out, whether we do it enough or not. We all kind of understand athletic gifts and talents and development, but I don't think we understand that other side of it. And we've learned that recovery, something as simple as sleep, is something that's really difficult for baseball players, even Major League Baseball players. I mean, think about how much travel they have, how, the different beds, the different situations, just the timing of their work, late night games, going East Coast to West Coast, and then recovering from the actual work they do. We've all seen pitchers, wrapped up in ice, having their arm down in a tub. We've gone so far beyond that. So that one I thought would be interesting to people and was really, really interesting to me personally.
Now, some of the things that you write about, I can't conceive of them being written about 20, 30 years ago, such as
Yeah.
mind body, because no one paid it, even weightlifting. A couple of generations ago, teams frowned upon weightlifting because it
Yeah.
thought they would make their players muscle bound. Uh,
Yeah.
as far as recovery goes, your specialty is injuries, and I'm always amazed because, yes, repetitive motion injuries, of course, things that you can't, you turn an ankle on the field, you pull a hamstring,
Mhm.
soft tissue injuries. Uh, you talk about people like Ted Williams, and I wish you great success because his book is perennially in the top 10
Yeah.
Amazon bestseller list. Uh, but as far as injuries go, and I'm losing my train of thought here a little bit, so forgive me, I'll come back to it. Uh, when players of Ted Williams' generation were plying their craft, many of them were not making big money. They had to take
Mhm.
off-season jobs. Today's
Mhm.
players don't need that, so they can train, and many do all year round. So it's like, if they're training so often and taking care of their bodies so diligently, how do they keep getting injured like this?
That's a great question, Ron. And one of the things we don't understand is just how good these athletes are. Somebody like Ted Williams. Um, I'll get back to this. One of my favorite stories, and you just reminded me of it. And I know a player near and dear to your heart is Yogi Berra. And I remember, I think it was Jane Levy's biography, or no, it was Alan Barras
Mm.
of Yogi. I read all of them, I think. Talked about him going back to St. Louis in the offseason early in his career, and he was a maitre d'. And can you imagine walking into a restaurant and A, there's a Yankee, but B, can you imagine Yogi doing that job? Hey, table for four. I mean, you would expect some bon mot from him or something. I just can't even imagine how that went. And it's one of those I often come back to. But going back to it, players are so much more athletic. I don't think players from the 60s and 70s and 80s by and large could play in today's game. Yeah, they would have modern techniques if they were growing up now. Could Ted Williams hit? Yes. They're the outliers. Nolan Ryan throws 100 miles an hour. What would he throw today?
And how many pitches would he throw?
Much less. The thing is, the example I always use is Ozzie Smith. When you think back to Ozzie Smith, one of the great shortstops of all time, superb fielder, terrible hitter at the start of his career. He hit under 200 for a large portion of the first two seasons. Would a player like that even get the chance, or would he be headed back to the farm to try to pick it up? Could a team carry even that good a fielder in the modern game? I don't think so. I mean, there's just no player like that. So getting back to the injury question, why they keep getting injured is they are such finely tuned athletes. This is much like, we just had the Indy 500 here a couple weekends ago in Indianapolis. And, back in those days, 200 miles an hour was something special. Now that's a warm-up lap, and they're going 230, 240 down the backstretch. And those cars blow up a little bit more. Luckily, safety has come better. And I think that's a great parallel to baseball, because these players are so finely tuned that the slightest thing breaks them down. But sports medicine and sports science have gotten better, both to build them up and try to get them back. If Tommy John surgery hadn't been invented, if Frank Jobe hadn't looked down into Tommy's elbow back in '74 and said, I have an idea, where would we be today? We would have a third less pitchers. I don't think the modern game would look the same. I don't know what it would look like, but I think it would certainly have a vastly different population. And I think we would be back throwing 88, 90 miles an hour. We wouldn't have exploding sliders and air benders and sinkers with 22 inches of run. It would be a vastly different game if we didn't take things so far to the limit that they broke.
One of the things you write about for me, it's under the rubric of old school. You compare umpires and now I won't say move toward, but the consideration of robot umpires calling balls and strikes. And when you think about it, well, they have that in tennis all the time.
Same technology.
Technology, and another thing, old school, that you include is that you could take somebody like Babe Ruth and put him in today's game, and it would be recognizable to him. Sure, it would be different because you have relief specialists, and you have night ball, and you have ethnicities playing that did not play back in his days. But the game itself is very, very similar. One of the things that's always fascinated me, you talk about the field and how baseball, unlike other sports, is not, aside from the base paths, the 90 feet from base to base, the rest of the field is open to interpretation. And there's no, like, football is a 100-yard field.
Yeah. It's
ice hockey, basketball, they're pretty much set with very slight variations, perhaps. I never knew that hockey rinks were not uniformly the same.
Yeah, you got some long, some wides. Same with football. I mean, and to bring it back to baseball, when you put a football field in Wrigley Field, it looks weird. Mm-hmm. But the Bears have played more games in Wrigley than they have in Soldier Field, even as long as they've been there. So yeah, I think the variation in it is beauty. We don't have nearly as much, largely because that move towards TV. TV demanded a more standard field. You want the same kind of angles. If you think about, the opportunities we have today to watch every game anywhere, assuming you have all the streaming services, it's pretty amazing because we didn't have that. My dad, growing up, was a Yankees fan. And I was like, how did you end up a Yankees fan? He grew up in the middle of America. He's like, that was the only game we ever saw. It was one game a week, game of the week was literal. And so, when he was watching Mickey Mantle or Tony Kubek or one of those guys that he idolized, that was the only chance he got. Now you can pick and choose. I mean, my all-time favorite player is probably Ichiro, and that's largely because, I was writing my column at night and Seattle was on the West Coast, so I would watch him. And he's just an absolutely fascinating player. With the TV, I think it's kind of pushed everything in. With the new stadiums, it's pushed everything in. I don't know if you've ever been to a game in San Francisco, but those seats are closer to the catcher than the pitcher is. And I mean, you can hear everything going on. So I'd like to see more variation. I remember talking to some people with the Washington Nationals when they were building their park, and I was like, build it huge, go 500 feet, build the Polo Grounds, build Ebbets Field, give us something completely different. And they didn't do it, largely because of TV. I think when you watch a game on TV, whether it's any of the locals, it all looks the same. And I think that's bad for baseball. Baseball should look different.
Well, sure, they have the center field camera, they have the camera behind the plate. Fans at the ballpark don't have the advantage. I'm sure they'll show a replay or two,
Yeah.
but when you're watching a game on TV, they'll show multiple angles, especially when there's a review by the umpires. They'll show multiple angles. That another thing, I know I'm talking stream of consciousness here, is because everything picks up something else. Umpires are operating in real time. So when they make their calls, they don't have the advantage of looking at it over and over again unless there's a challenge. And I don't think fans appreciate the difficulty of that job because they have the advantage of seeing. And when you listen to the announcers in the booth, and I have another question I want to ask about that if I don't forget it, they will bemoan the fact that the umpire blew the call. Well, they have the advantage of watching in real play.
Exactly. Though that moaning about the umps has been around for as long as baseball has, likely. It was Joe Sheehan who had the idea that I remember him writing this about 10 years ago. For however many years, 100-something years of the game, the umpire's eyes were the best possible judge. These guys are really, really good. Even the bad umpires are really, really good at what they do. Some of the best in the world. There are less umpires than there are Major League Baseball players. So yes, they're really, really good. The thing is, when we have the ease of technology to see multiple slow-mo, hyper slow-mo angles and get it right, I think we should to some extent. We can debate where that extent is. The one I don't think is debatable anymore is the strike zone. You mentioned Hawkeye earlier in tennis. Hawkeye is now in baseball. We can, with technology, have a clean, consistent, absolute, objective strike zone. Is it perfect? No. But if we can go from Angel Hernandez to 99.9%, that's something we should do within the game. It should make the game better. We should make a way to get that to lower levels. I watched a terribly umpired college baseball game a couple of days ago. So, and the umpire who pushed the kid at Eastern Carolina, he never should umpire again. That was crazy, but off topic. I just think we should take the best possible technology. 50 years from now, if it's some sort of laser hologram thing that's the strike zone, great. I think we should have the best possible technology. I don't think we're ever going to get rid of umpires, nor should we, but I think we should have the best technology possible for pretty much everything.
Do I recall correctly, is there some sort of experiment they're doing or will be doing with umpires who, like the pitchers and catchers, are wearing earpieces to communicate back and forth? The umpires will be wearing some sort of device that will alert them, like the technology, the laser, whatever technology they use, will call the balls and strikes and relay it to the umpire. Is that so?
Yeah, that's the way they're doing it in AAA right now, is that it basically, there was an earpiece that they were using that basically would just say ball or strike, and they would make the call. I had always thought one of the ways we could go would be to, put a buzzer in their little clicker that they use for balls and strikes to keep track. And, if they were right, no buzz. If they were wrong, they get a buzz. Not to
Like on a
correct
game
it.
show.
Yeah, but just say, hey, maybe that one was a bit more outside than you thought. And I thought we could self-correct. But whether it's an earpiece, the problem with the pitch com with the little buttons, that's great, but teams already have cameras on those, and I've heard there's going to be abuse of that, and they're going to try to figure out how to get past that. I don't know how they're going to. The earpiece is that, the catcher has to speak in code still. He can't say, slider on the outside with a hitter standing right there. So is it going to end up with the manager calling the game? Is that going to slow things down, which is the absolute opposite of what Major League Baseball wants? There's going to be a technological solution. The biggest problem that I've seen with it is it's really tough to keep the earpiece in. Pitching is a violent motion. So with the earpiece, I remember there was one that was being used in college, and the kid would throw, and you could see the earpiece fly off like a badly fitting hat, and he'd go search the grass and put it back in. That just wasn't going to work.
I want to talk about the impact technology has on the broadcasters. Many, if not all teams, employ a former player from, I'm thinking of Keith Hernandez, so from the 70s and 80s. And how do you find, are they taking well to the, when you have to start including launch angle and exit velocity and rotation, which I don't think they do as much as the offense. But do they take to it well? Do they resent it? Do they think, well, things are better and simpler in my day? How does that impact the way we perceive the game on radio and TV?
I think it's a generational thing. There are some players, Hernandez specifically, I haven't seen or heard. He's still a very good announcer. The reason they're there, and I think we see this more in football, is that essentially they understand the game. I remember when Tony Romo was first announcing NFL games, and he seemed almost psychic because he'd know what play was coming, what they were looking for, what the quarterback was seeing. It was because he was that close to the game. As he gets 10, 15 years away from the game and the game has evolved, he's going to lose that. The only guy I know that has maintained that kind of almost psychic nature is Steve Stone. I grew up, he hates when I say it, I grew up watching it. I learned so much about pitching from Steve Stone, just explaining things. Here's a slider, here's situational pitching, execution of pitching, and he still does it for the White Sox broadcast with Jason Benetti, who's phenomenal. I think there are so many good announcers in the game today. Maybe we don't have the characters, the Red Barbers, even the Vin Scullys. There's never going to be another Vin Scully, but there's a lot of guys who are just great. Boog Shambi, who's a friend, Benetti, just Don Orsillo is so fun to watch. And I'm leaving out 27 others. I think the announcers, to some extent, will get it. I mean, David Cohn understands pitching so well and has taken some of the new school technologies and brought them in. The Cubs bring in Lance Brzezowski, who does a great job explaining things. So do they have to do it? No, you can bring somebody in for an inning to talk about something the way that broadcasts do with either an umpire. I think they should have an injury person who's there, and when Mike Trout strains a groin, they call him in and tell you exactly what's going on. I think broadcast could be enhanced, but I think for the most part, it comes down to whether the announcer wants to accept that the game is changing or whether they want to just hang on. There are some announcers I won't name, but man, they just hate everything new about baseball. Uh-huh. And while it was great in the 80s and 90s, it can never be that good again. And it's like, if you don't really love baseball, go play golf, go do something else. don't talk it down for everybody else, because there are a lot of us out here that still love this game and want to see it grow.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the business side of publishing a book. Uh, Last couple of years, we've been dealing, of course, with COVID, and it has impacted the way authors publicize their book. Are you able to go do book events, do tours, do speaking engagements?
Yeah, I'm not Michael Lewis, so no nationwide tour or anything. I don't think this was ever going to be on that level. But I've done some events. I did an event here in Indianapolis. We've got some events lined up for the Science of Football, which is coming out in September. So yeah, I've been able to. But honestly, for me, I think the ability to connect with people. I did a thing on Reddit where people ask questions. Being able to just answer questions, things like that, I think are much more about something like this, where we're talking about it. If I could see my favorite authors, if Don Winslow, when he starts actually talks about books, it's so great when authors go out and really talk about not just the book, but like you said, the process of it. How do you do this every day? Those are the things to me that are fascinating. I heard an interview with Roger Angel, who just recently passed. They played an old interview on Fresh Air, and Terry Gross just gets so much out of people. And Angel had, at that point, 90 something years of writing, and it was a family business, for God's sake. Just seeing little tidbits of his process, you can do this for a lifetime and still learn from somebody like that.
Well, that's one of the reasons I do this, is because I love learning about the process and hearing everyone does it differently. And I just find behind the scenes fascinating, and I want people to know that, just because you see a finished product, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that go into it. So we've been talking with Will Carroll, author of the new book, The Science of Baseball, the math, technology, and data behind the great American pastime. Will, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Hey, I'm absolutely honored. Thanks a lot, Ron.